Welcome to the program Woke Up, where we amplify the voices of those whom today's critical social justice movement and woke ideology have seduced. They realized they were being led to a place they did not want to be and woke up to tell their story. Now the host, Michael Ballantyne.
Well, hello. We're real excited today for our podcast. We have an amazing guest, a friend of mine, actually, been friends with for quite some time. And so welcome to the podcast. We have left today's social justice movement and wokeism, and we really want to amplify voices of people that have been through the process, have been involved with this ideology that's tremendously affecting every aspect of our country, our culture, family relationships, institutions, and to just take a lens and look at this whole movement and the effect from an objective perspective. And so we welcome you here to the show. This is my friend Scott Thorngate. I just love his story and the tools that he gave me to understand the mindset, the thought process, to have compassion, to love, to understand better, and what is going on. Because I know that many of you are considering becoming a social justice warrior in today's context in the United States. And it's wonderful to be for justice. But what is going on today, he's going to share about his process of getting into this movement and what his life was like during it. And he's got some amazing insights for people and families that have been affected by loved ones and relationships that have been affected, and not always for the better, to give hope and encouragement of what's really going on today in today's world. And so, Scott, welcome to the show, and very grateful and honored that you would come here and spend time with us. And so
thank you for having me.
So I want to hear about your journey, and I think our guests would love to hear it.
Sure. Yeah, well, I never got into the deep activism side of it. It definitely, through my late teenage years, a total change of character and subsequently how my life was going took place as I started to grow up and look out into the world. I started to just change my beliefs in ways that led to a lot of inner conflict. And I often found myself turning that inner conflict out onto others. I got very depressed, nihilistic, resentful.
What is nihilistic? Can you explain that?
Nihilism is kind of a philosophical take on reality in a basic sense, where you just have this view, it's very cynical, but basically that nothing really matters. And of course, I don't think there are actually any 100% true nihilists who think that absolutely nothing matters, because at the end of the day, the idea that nothing matters very much to them. But it can be kind of born out of a subconscious solipsism, which is the belief that you and your experience are maybe the only thing that's real, or at least it's more real than the world around you and the people in it. A good example of that would be like kind of that impression that the world around you is a movie that's being played for you. You know, you're the one and only star, and your experience is like a movie. You're watching it, and it just has less reality than your interpretation of it. And that includes other people in it. They have less reality. And your only mode of operation in that situation, if you still care about anything, like being a good person, is to assert more control, be more of a director in your own life. It's often masked as some form of self-actualization. But yeah, that type of thinking kind of set in, as soon as I began to be uncertain about some of my previous beliefs. A big one was, had I just adopted and accepted the beliefs and views of my parents, for instance. And that type of doubt sets in, and you run with it in a direction that you don't exactly know where the end is. You just want to run and find out what's there. And so I started running. Left my family, moved away, just tried to distance myself in whatever way possible. And I started to become isolated, resentful, limiting my friends to only those who would not challenge me on any of my beliefs and ideas, which were nihilistic. And I did start to go into, I guess, social justice warrior is like a negative term. And I can't say that I myself was a very strong activist. It more just represented itself as, if anyone brought those, traditional or conservative topics up, I felt like it was my duty to tear them down. So a lot of personal struggle and looking back on it now, I just think I just think, how many people have I hurt because it affected my personal relationships. Obviously, not only with my family, but any relationship that I would have would be very destructive, and I could easily disassociate from those relationships if I needed to maintain my ideologies. So it's been a long road back, and I'm not completely back even, but now I'm able to look back and say, oh, well, what was really my mindset at the time? Why was I thinking that way? And so I've studied a lot of philosophy since then and tried to develop a deeper sense of all of that. And it's given me, not an absolutist view in any sense. I'm not on one side or the other, but it's giving me a tempered view of, the psychology of purpose and meaning and how that influences our lives and our relationships, and thereby the lives of others, the ones we care about.
And in this mindset, which I think are so many parallels to what is going on in our society through a lot of the activist movements, gender ideology and race theories and anti-colonization. And it just seems to be like almost a negativity and aggression toward institutions, primary institutions of life, family, church, government, the military, law, corporations, and it's seeping into all aspects of society. And one of the things in our conversations that I've noticed is that sometimes people are really mean that are in this ideology. It's almost like their identity is into tearing somebody down and humiliating them or shaming them or canceling them. And why don't you talk a little bit about what goes in the mind of somebody who has adopted this nihilistic or tear down the system mindset? Like, how does it make you feel when you're doing this and hurting somebody so profoundly?
It's fundamentally a mistrust or a distrust. And that comes out of a fear of being basically kicked off of the throne of your ability to control your life and be a good person. You start to view these things as obstacles to your personal virtue. Anything that can assert authority over you, basically, is to be not trusted. And sometimes that's fine. Sometimes that's true. But in a lot of ways, it's just the overreaction to that. All of it should be not trusted, is the overreaction. Anything, any source of power or authority, like I said, is going to be inherently corrupted. And you, as the one who's going to change it for the better, because you want to be the protagonist in your own story, obviously, you're going to feel like you're obligated to fight against it, to tear it down. And just the constant just tearing of those structures, those hierarchies of power and authority down is the best way to be a good person, basically.
And when you do that, and you're tearing down what you look at as a system of oppression or something that's flawed, and you're causing pain, what happens internally? Are you feeling positive about what you're doing, irrespective of what other people are going through and the relational destruction that you're causing of people that once were friends or siblings or parents or teachers?
You relate it to the concept of justice very strongly. So even if you are hurting someone, you're doing so because it's the right thing to do, because they represent, or they're caught up in, or they represent in some way the system which oppresses this or that group. Or a very powerful one I find is that of the authority of the parents over the children. And then we can kind of tend to multiply that out into other areas of social and political life. And, you start to just feel that, just like in the justice system, there's always a winner and a loser in a sense when justice is done. One person gets, amelioration from some type of victimhood, they get compensated, and another side gets penalized, which hurts in some sense. And so when you're carrying out justice, it's really not a bad thing that someone is hurt by it. It's actually a good thing, because that is how you met out that justice and correct the system in some sense, which is totally valid on its own grounds, in terms of the concept of justice. But the over application of that into all instances of your personal life can become kind of like a justice drug. You're hooked on that feeling of meting out justice because your view is how you look at the world is right. And in order to be a good person, you would obviously need to pursue that.
Wow, that's fascinating. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit, I'd like to go back a little further to your childhood. Are your biological parents, were they married during your childhood?
Yes.
And are they still married?
They're not.
They're not. And how old were you when they separated or got divorced?
They waited till actually I left for college.
Okay.
Yeah.
And during this process, would you describe like your childhood as healthy, or was it a lot of dysfunction? Or I know it's personal, so
No, yeah,
answers.
mainly healthy. I didn't have an especially difficult childhood, so I can't blame anything on that. This was totally something that I think just developed in response to what I was seeing outside in the world, and it just accumulated that when I eventually left the family environment and tried to go out and make my own way, that I was just already primed to accept all of it. So yeah, I mean, like, it's not necessarily from any specific type of trauma or anything that this can develop, although it certainly could be.
Yes.
It's just it's a thing that's out there in the world that it's trying to encode into society these new ways, thinking about what is the correct concept of purpose and meaning. And the old ways are suspect. The old ways that people would find purpose and meaning are the bottom line, like, contributor and instigator of any form of social injustice. So, and the new ways are totally in line with fostering this nihilistic viewpoint. And I was in that state of mind. So I went into it very quickly, very hard and deeply. And that shift in my thinking just obliterated any relationships that I was in. Just, I viewed them so differently than how I should, where even in my own personal life, I was more real than the other person. And I only could tolerate people in my life who were not going to challenge me on that. And anytime there was someone in my life who would challenge me on that, then I was supposed to narrow in on them as if they were simply a target.
Wow.
And just tear them down, because that is how I started to feel like I could be a good person, which is this narrative to cause chaos in order to change the system, as if chaos is the only way to make a difference.
So this would include people that at one time in your life you were close to, whether they be friends, or do you have siblings? Or
I do. I have a brother.
And possibly people close to you, friends or teachers or people in groups or clubs, or your mom and dad or grandparents, like anybody that was once really close and loving to you. Did you feel this need to tear at and hurt?
Oh yeah. I mean, my parents, definitely. My mom probably got the brunt of it. And it was because my dad didn't really talk to me about these things. He never was very, like, prescriptive in terms of giving me guidance in my life, which, I'd take, as a positive and negative in some respects. My mom was always very prescriptive and always wanting to talk to me about what I was thinking, how I was evaluating what was important in my life. And, she comes from a very, religious family. Traditional upbringing. It's a very important part of her life, and she loves me very much. And unfortunately, I disregarded the love part because all I could see was that she was a part of the problem. And so I definitely, obviously, very much regret the way that I treated her while I was in that state of mind. Because again, she was the strongest source in my life for that feeling of meting out justice. And the way that I could do that more and to feel like more of a good person was to actually care about her less in order for me to psychologically get away with it in some sense.
You must have devastated her.
Oh yeah.
Wow, it's pretty impactful. And I see this going on a lot in terms of these thoughts and ideas. I think are birthed in the philosophical realm. They're birthed in universities. They're promulgated in universities. And it seems like when this worldview, this ideology of awakening or wokeism to the issues of there are problems in the world, there is suffering in the world, and there is inequality in terms of outcome and in some ways probably opportunity too, that we want to make it right. And so when you buy into this and you give your mind and your energy and your meditation to making things right, that's a noble cause in many ways. But it seems like this is a different animal than simply wanting to make things right. It's like a destructive element that is causing a lot of pain in relationships and institutions. And it's almost like a virus in some ways. It takes over the mind, that everything gets subjugated this cause, whatever it might be. And whether it's family relationships, sibling relationships, friendships, your faith in God, your higher power, all gets second fiddle to this ideology. Would you kind of agree with that, or just something
Yeah.
I've seemed to be picking up on?
Yeah, I mean, it's very pervasive. When you think about, and a lot of this is running subconsciously, I think, in most people's minds when they think about these deep. I mean, I'm suggesting that I certainly, and I don't see that a lot of people who are also in that mind state, we're thinking very deeply about those types of things. It's very much path of least resistance, and the world's going to provide that path of least resistance towards like the feel goods, essentially. And the path of least resistance is not always what's best. It could develop a false sense, which I think is very true in this case. So yeah, I think it's operating subconsciously in a lot of ways. And that means from the perspective of someone else, who maybe cares about the individual who's in that situation, it's very hard to suggest that there's something that they could possibly say or do or present to them that can really get through to them, because ultimately they have unexamined deeper sets of beliefs that are going on. And a lot of times it's this kind of the same thing. If you think about like a therapist and a client in the relationship there, oftentimes the therapist would be a bad therapist ultimately to just push them on the things that they themselves have not yet examined. A lot of times it's just about helping them through each new situation, and then that can, if they are successful in helping them with that, then the hope is that that person can get to a place first where they could actually then self-examine.
Yes.
Instead of be clouded by the normal ongoings and events of life. So in the same way, I would say that it's hard to suggest that if from a parent, who wants to talk to their child, they care about them and they see their life as maybe not going so great and they don't seem to be happy or as happy as they remember them, and it seems to be getting worse. There's not really much you can say to directly address that, unfortunately. I think that's
so.
The
Your
case.
mom, for example, really couldn't have the magic words to say how much she loves you and believes in you, or you got to change your mind, son. There was like nothing she could have done in that moment to really change your attitude.
I will say that she did do probably the one most important thing, which was still always love and support me and be there for me. And I think at root, that's really just the one overriding thing you can do. And I get that sucks. I get that a lot of people are probably looking for more of a suggestion than that. They want to know, some people want like, if I could just formulate this bulletproof argument as to why they shouldn't think that way, then they'll be enlightened. And I've just got to get in there and I just got to press them. A lot of times that can have the opposite effect that's intended, because again, that individual is oftentimes seeing the parent as the main object in their life that represents what they should be fighting against. So if you come to them, their response is just going to be to tear you down and build resentment, and the relationship will just get worse. And a lot of parents might even get discouraged and get to a point where they say, heck with it, So, but there's also needs to be the recognition, I think, that a lot of these kids, teenagers, young adults, people in their 20s, that they, even though you or the parents or people that care about those individuals, they might see it as there's some sort of evil in their hearts. And, fundamentally, I do believe that these deep philosophical beliefs are evil in a very real sense. The person that has those things running subconsciously in them is still pursuing the good that everyone's pursuing. They want the narrative of their lives. They're the hero. They're the one to really help people to be the best version of themselves. And I think that's something that needs to be spoken to in terms of when you try to communicate, always make sure that you're validating that.
Yeah, John McWhorter wrote a book on racism, and I don't remember the name, it was Race Religion. I read the book, and he really emphasizes the point that a lot of the social justice warriors that are most active and the most vocal, he ascribes the word the elect. They look at themselves as they're the elect. They're the chosen one to fight racism. And you see the same philosophy being played out with the new queer LGBTQ, with emphasis on queer movement, that we are going to help the marginalized. It's like, I'm the one that's called to do this. And there's almost like an ideology that, if I don't do it, nobody will, but I'm going to be the ally this allyship, whether it's the Black community, whether it's the queer community, whether it's really radical feminists, because in some ways I understand feminism and I have a family with very strong women, and but sometimes it's just so over the top of tearing down everything to do with masculinity, and a young boy where he's afraid to have a sexual impulse because of the Me Too movement, and it manifests itself in society in ways that are too over the top, as you're
Right.
suggesting. And so the one thing that you said your mom did is she always communicated that she loved you and was for you, but you didn't want to hear anything from her because she was the systemic problem. And I know for a fact all over America, this is happening where adult children are estranged from their parents, and parents are being broken, families are being torn apart. I know this from many people. I've been involved with groups. And it's a big phenomenon. And so how many years were you in this space mentally, nihilism, as you describe it?
I would say it probably started to develop through high school.
Mm-hmm.
And it just came from what I think is a somewhat natural process of starting to doubt maybe the religion with which you were raised, the cultural norms in which you experienced in your hometown. And as soon as you get out there, see that there are these other options that, I mean, at least for me personally, it was kind of the sense that I started to ask myself, had I been unjustly shielded from these other possibilities? So maybe I should, look into them. And that came with the concordant doubt of the beliefs that I had up to that time, whether they were just pushed on me and I didn't have any other option. So then I started to, look out and search and see the different aspects. And
how long overall was this to the place where you said, I want to get out of this and go in a more sustainable, healthy way? How many years?
So from that point, well, I just want to say from that point on, it was like my life got progressively worse. And it was just eventually that it got so bad that I felt I needed to examine, well, was this whole mode of thinking, of doubting everything and constantly trying to find, new things to hold on to in terms of belief, whether that itself was the problem. And so this probably didn't really occur to me until, my whole life was basically in shambles. I was getting into relationships that were shorter and shorter and, less personal. And I was losing friends left and right just because I literally had no motivation to keep up with them. And there was even a point where I went through like 3 jobs in the course of a year. So then I started to not even be able to hold a job. Just my whole life was just a wreck, and it was just confusion and darkness. And
wow.
And I was getting depressive and manic, and I had like insomnia. I would just feel each day I would get to the end of the day and be like, I didn't really do anything. And so I would stay up late at night getting something totally pointless done just so I could feel that little surge of accomplishment enough that I could even sleep. So yeah, a couple years of that, and I was forced into a position to try to take a step back and really examine.
Did you have suicidal ideations at all, or?
Not necessarily. It was more, I'd say it was more just I was divorced from any source of meaning. I still wanted to find out what the meaning was. So that still fueled my will to live in some sense. I still wanted to figure out what it was. What was I missing? But I was just so discouraged that going through everything that I was trying was just not working out. So I did end up, studying philosophy and taking classes and doing a lot of research myself and getting into those deep introspective issues like the subconscious realities of having, nihilistic tendencies, solipsism and things like that. Really examining those things. And, you get to a place where if you run in place for long enough, you start to, eat away at the ground. And you start to go lower and lower into this hole. And the faster you run and not get anywhere, then the deeper the hole gets until you can't even see the world around you. You're totally under the ground. And then the only place you can look is up. That's basically how it had to happen. And I started doing, meditation. I did some silent retreats, just me out in the wilderness, not speaking and just survival camping basically. And through, meditation and then eventually prayer, started to just build a different view of myself, a view that was more, I'm part of all of this and everything that I do does matter. And I mean everything, even the smallest interaction with my mother matters very deeply. So yeah, it was just a movement away from thinking about only like thinking about what I need to do in order to feel like a good person. Very just closed off type of, reverberating type of mental state, because you're not bouncing it off anything that's out there separate from you. And that's really what we need. We need to know that the other person is valuable as an other, not valuable because of how much they are a reflection of you. Those are just the deep philosophical things, but we can talk more about
but I find
how
that
someone would respond to that.
I find that fascinating because I don't know this side of you. I've known you. We were in a group together at our local church, and I found you to be incredibly engaging with a group of 20 people, articulate, kind to everybody. There's a massive cross section of different economic status and age groups, and I found that you flowed with everybody. And I know that you're going to be a father coming up, and you found.
Yes.
Love and fulfillment in a beautiful, intimate relationship, and you're going to have a daughter in February.
Yep.
So congratulations. And so I can't imagine you in that context that you're describing, in that space of depression and bondage, mental bondage to your own that you created.
Yeah. And I'm not completely out of it. I'll be the first to admit that I struggle with it every day. I've only maybe been on this path, I would say, for the last, I guess, maybe 4 years.
So you're 33 now, if I remember right.
33. Right.
So there's a good decade of darkness. And so one of the things that, because I know a lot of people listening are going to be parents looking for hope, or brothers that are estranged with their sibling, or friends that have been broken, friendships. And so you say that there was nothing anyone could really say intellectually, if I have this magic formula, I'm going to reach Scott and he's going to hear me and everything will be fine and we'll work it out. And you're like, no, that's not what's going to likely happen, because they view you as part of the problem and your mindset is the problem.
And you're the one that's there being the problem in their life. Like, you're the main point of contact for that type of interaction.
But you said that your mom was always there and she always communicated her love for you, and that was important. And so how do parents or loved ones that are like victims of losing a loved one to this ideology, and then it becomes so contentious and so destructive and so accusatory, and the pain associated with that, what is the best approach for a parent that's just looking for solutions because they love their child and they aren't as connected, or a brother-sister relationship that's just not there anymore? What do you do? Like, what's the posture? How do you communicate love, but also have certain levels of boundaries to minimize abuse, which is destructive? Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, first of all, like, you don't have to change what you believe in in order to reach them. Sometimes you can. Sometimes it's a great thing to have maybe a belief that is maybe too strong, kind of mitigated by someone else's take on it. And that's a great conversation to have. But ultimately, if you care about someone like this and you see their life is getting worse and you are looking for some way to help them and change them, I would strongly suggest that you not push them on the details of what they're thinking and what their beliefs are. I think oftentimes we can kind of get caught up in wanting to argue our side of things. And like you said, if we could just get through to them with some silver bullet argument that, it will reach them and they'll come to see the light.
Or a memory of the relationship we once shared. Of course, they're going to want to, you can't engage on that level at this point if somebody's in that space.
Right. And there needs to be, because ultimately, I think when it comes to questions of purpose and meaning, we're all scared. We're all scared about what that means. And so there needs to be some validation, and it's a hard thing to pursue that through someone who is constantly against you in very many ways, but just to pursue, like, reiterating, hey, I know that you're trying to be, the best person you can possibly be. And I know you're going to figure it out, to just maintain that for them, because they may not ultimately figure it out, in a sense, until their life comes crashing down around them. And, God help them if they don't feel like they have a place they can run back to at that point. So that's what I would suggest, is like, it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. You want solutions here and now, but it's that level of personal sacrifice, like, admitting to yourself, like, maybe I don't have to feel like my loved one is a reflection on me and have that motivate my want to change them or make their life better. Sometimes you can just love them for them.
Yeah.
And that'd be the best, I would say.
And I think to, like in a sibling relationship, to not take on too much guilt and accusations, or a parent-child relationship, to take on a certain level of whatever might be that you're guilty of, but you can't fix somebody. And I love what you're saying about just being there and being present, but don't take it on personally, and be able to compartmentalize. This is a mental space that my loved one is going through. And even though they're in a really destructive place and they've hurt me deeply, I'm not going to respond in kind. I'm just going to have boundaries to a certain level, but to affirm the value in them as a person primarily, and then also the social justice thing that they're looking for, to help the marginalized or help their interpretation of those that are victimized by oppression. And that's noble. That's a beautiful thing. So affirm that, even though you don't believe in the methodology, but don't get totally tied into it where your whole identity is tied up whether or not you can restore the relationship, because you can't.
Right.
And just love them and be there and let them know that you're always present, and then at the right time, with the ups and downs of life, they know that they have a friend or a loved one that they can count on.
Exactly.
I think that's a lot of wisdom to that, because otherwise you just drive yourself nuts. Oh, the magic bullet. Or,
right.
I've talked to many parents who are like, I just don't understand my child now. They're so mean to me. I just can't believe it. Do they even remember their childhood? The things that they're saying, a few couples in particular are just, they've lost their 25-year-old daughter, and the daughter is just so cruel. It's like, what happened? And so they're dealing with an ideology, as you're saying, on a subconscious level that is destructive ultimately, if not tempered, and not respecting the other, as you're saying, and loving the other, because every human being deserves value and dignity, even the oppressors.
Right.
Not everything about oppressor is totally bad. They might have some virtue. Like, even my mind comes to, and I want to be careful the way I phrase this. I'm saying everybody has dignity, everybody has value, everybody is made in the image of God. And so even the Nazis that were exterminating Jews, there was one virtue they had, and that was loyalty. And that's a virtue. Now, it was totally misplaced. It was totally demonic. It was horrible, but maybe work with somebody where they're at. I notice that you're a loyal person, and then just be there for them. And just because they cancel you, don't cancel them. Love them. But you have to have boundaries. It takes a lot of wisdom, and there's so much pain involved with it, and tearing down. It's a tough needle to thread, I think.
Right. Humility and knowing that, you don't have it all figured out either.
Yeah.
And pursuing vulnerability so deeply that you can let go of even your own want to make it make sense to you.
Because you can't figure it out, because it's in the brain of somebody else.
Right.
And you don't have that authority. You don't have that ability.
Right.
You only have the access that you're allowed, or that you're freely given by the other.
Yes.
So is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience? Maybe people that are in this social justice warrior movement that are really strong? Because when you look at it, like, statistically, it seems like there's so much sociological pressure to conform to a certain script, but the real vocalists, the real strong ones, might be 10% of the population, but they have the loudest platform, and others are just kind of going along. They want to connect. They don't want to be canceled themselves. And so young people that are considering this, or young people that are in it, as you say, you can't talk them out of it. Maybe just some things for them to think about, that they can hear from you, that they might think about over time and mull over in a year or 2 years from now, knowing that there's no magic bullets immediately from this podcast, but that maybe you can plant a seed where somebody can maybe just look at things from a different perspective, that are locked up in this revolutionary state, so to speak.
Yeah, the revolutionary state, the idea that all of these systems of authority are to be on the chopping block if we're going to make any progress towards, equality, equity, that cycle of destruction. The idea is kind of, let's speed that up. The faster we can get rid of those things, the better. I would say if chaos is your goal, and again, someone thinking like that would probably have a problem with my characterization of that as chaos. But if that's your goal, constantly changing and tearing down existing modes of belief, or patterns that echo out from these hierarchies of authority that are damaging, then how could that not replicate itself in your own personal life? How could that not affect your relationships? And because you can scale the way that you deal with the broader social and political ideas, you can scale that also down to how you think about family and relationships. And it becomes really hard to thread the needle between wanting order, personal responsibility, self-sacrifice on one side of the spectrum and the complete opposite of that on the other side of the spectrum. That's a hard line to walk, and it's going to cause confusion. I was certainly trying to thread that needle and doing a very poor job of it. So that's the one thing I would say.
What comes out of it on the back end? Okay, you tear down the system, you tear down the relationship, you tear down the institution. Okay, then it's replaced with what? That's broken, maybe irreparable. So then just humanity, something will emerge. Is there any thought of like, what are we going to replace this with? Okay, it's one thing to say, I'm against this, I hate this, this has got to go, this has got to go. Okay, what comes out of that? Like, do we get to a utopia, or is it just pain and brokenness and destruction? And
yeah, it's discontinuity, ultimately, kind of a synonym for chaos, but discontinuity in the sense that we should just constantly be changing things out for whatever the next better thing is, the new iteration of better justice or more equality or more this, and you can play that game forever.
And then you get that, but that still won't be sufficient because it'll be transformed into something new.
Whatever one comes in is instantly going to build itself into the next example of authority.
And what needs to be torn down again?
Authority and hierarchies,
yeah,
in any sense. So it's just that constant replacement. And I know there are some who think that perpetual state of change is the best state of affairs, but it's the discontinuity. How can you have a sense of meaning and purpose? What kind of meaning and purpose is it to assert that there is none? It's a very problematic line of reasoning to say that this is kind of like the moral relativism argument. Let's say if someone says there is no absolute truth, well, does that stand on its own terms? Because is even what you just said just there, that there is no absolute truth?
Is that an absolute truth?
Is that an absolute truth?
Exactly.
So it just instantly eats itself on like a logical analysis. And again, I just think there's a lot of people out there that haven't looked down deeply enough into seeing where the fundamental contradictions lie. They kind of just take it on the surface of how it represents itself.
Within their own ideology, their own subconscious.
Yep. And it's validated. You can kind of get a good feeling like you're doing something purposeful and meaningful, but there's no continuity. You just have to keep at it because the underlying meaning is transient. So you have to keep up with that transience, which in a lot of ways makes it kind of like how our bodies respond to drugs. So we have to keep up with it. We always have to be looking for that next source of high, the high of feeling like a good person.
So your body and soul and mind never get into homeostasis where we've arrived. It's always the next thing. One of the things I just talked to you that really impacted me when we were having some dialogue is because I just was like, why are people so mean? Like, you're a racist, cancel you. And what is it in the subconscious of this aggressive social justice movement that's instead of like reasoning with somebody, hey, you're hurting somebody's feelings when you say it like this. Can you like reconsider because, the effect of your words have power. You might have hurt somebody's feelings and win somebody over to in a nuanced way to influence them to be more mindful of what is a racist comment or things like that. But instead, there's been a posture of brutal attack, and I don't know how helpful that is in the long term, but you had said something about, but it feels so good to tear someone down in the moment. There's something in our id. Can you talk about there's something going on, whether it's the support from the groupthink, or what satisfaction do you get just destroying another human being and burying them, because they have a different ideology or they say a stupid comment?
It's related to that concept of what you really feel you're doing is meting out justice. So it doesn't matter so much if you are hurting them, because it's just to make them feel bad and ashamed and things like that.
It's really narcissistic in the sense it makes you the highest authority of what justice really is versus justice being outside of one's own mind and our own thoughts, that there is a creator that is ultimately governs the affairs of men, but it almost makes you God in a way that, and I'm the arbiter of all truth, and I'm the one that's going to, make that which is wrong right, And if
I would say that they're speaking maybe under the notion that they're supporting that higher good,
right?
But a real concept of justice, if there's a real concept of justice to be had, it has to include everybody. As soon as you start suggesting that certain people should be excluded from the concept of justice. Because justice it should be contextual. It should be a agglomeration of everybody to, consign and conform themselves to this mutual respect type of state where everyone is really an individual and everyone has an equal ability to contribute to what is true and good, instead of one person having more or less ability to be considered in that respect based on where you think they fall on, a social hierarchy of maybe oppressor or oppressed or any other type of thing like that. So if you're meting out justice, it's basically a way to get that good feeling. You don't want to allow the other person their equal representation. So I'm sorry, what was the original question?
Well, just the aspect of justice, and makes you the highest authority, the arbiter of all truth,
yes.
And the narcissism.
You're saying why it makes you feel good.
Yeah, that was yes.
Yes.
Why does it make you feel good?
Well, it makes you feel good because you get to feel morally and intellectually superior, which is not. It's certainly not just a problem with, people on the left or any one group in particular. This is a problem we all struggle with. It's very tempting to want to feel morally and intellectually superior, especially because we've kind of blurred the lines of like economic superiority, which was, traditionally, if you were, your higher status was based on your wealth. And we've kind of, shut that down for, I would say both good reasons and bad reasons. There are good consequences to that and bad consequences to that. One of the bad consequences to that is that we still want validation. And so we're going to shift it somewhere else. And where we've shifted it, with the access to technology and social media and everything's at everyone's fingertips, the arms race is really on for intellectual superiority because anyone can participate, on a more or less equal platform, at least in first world country like the United States. So it's now the competition where once, how we approached business dealings, now we're starting to port that into our personal dealings with just personal relationships. And I think that's a very denigrating basis for personal relationships. I mean, and that it just comes up a lot. It's an aspect of being able to control the other person in some sense.
It seems like there's an element of, as you're talking about, it was originally economic, and the Marxist theory of the bourgeois and the proletariat, the class struggle, has pivoted and shifted into, some would say, cultural Marxism of the oppressor and oppressed, the same bourgeois proletariat of those that are white versus black, or heterosexual versus queer, or male and female. And we're putting everybody into this dialectic group and class struggle and cultural struggle. And it seems like, the intellectuals and those that aren't, those. Yeah. So it is, I think that goes along with what you're saying in terms of the pivot versus just the economic aspects. It's now filtered into all levels of society.
Right. And so, if you're intellectually superior, then you would naturally feel that you have more of an ability to speak for everybody. Well, and I'm not saying I'm immune to that,
Well, Scott,
I'm sitting here trying to speak for everybody, but
yeah, you can't.
Right.
But you provided tremendous insights, and it's been a great educational opportunity for me and our listeners as well. And I hope everybody benefits. Really appreciate your vulnerability and the depth of your personal sharing and your journey and your testimony. And, you gave us all a lot to think about. I really appreciate that. And I want to congratulate you on finding your life partner and a new baby. And your world is going to open up in ways you can't even begin to imagine. And, I think I'm quite confident there might be somebody here that would like to get a hold of you. And so I'd like to give you the final word of any last things to summarize, or a word of encouragement for our audience, but then possibly how somebody might want to reach out to talk to you in the future.
Well, I'm not very present on social media. I've kind of completely gotten rid of that. I will accept, email. Email is csthorngate@gmail.com.
csthorngate, just like it sounds, one altogether, .com. csthorngate.com.
At gmail.com.
At gmail.com, right.
Right. And yeah, I'd love to, start doing things, once I get my footing with, establishing my home life and putting this family that me and my partner are trying to create together.
Well, it's coming.
It's coming, whether I want it or not. But so once I get a wrap on all of that, then I'd love to start branching out into these areas and using the gifts I feel I have to talk about. I mean, I'm not a very political person, but I just love the philosophical and the psychological aspect to all of this. How we can all come together and really, figure all of this out together.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And you've gone from being alone and progressively isolated to now awakened in the truest sense, where humanity is valuable and life does have meaning. And you want to branch out and the things that you've been through, the things that you've thought about, to share those with others and embrace others. And I love that. I love that attitude that you have. And may God bless you in your future and prosper you. And may peace rest in your heart.
God bless you as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks again.